Welcome, my name's Antonio Vecchio and I'm the Consumer Engagement Lead at the Spinal Research Institute. Today in our conversation, I'm interviewing Dr. Diana Dorstyn from the University of Adelaide. Diana is a Senior Lecturer and Postgraduate Coordinator in the School of Psychology. Diana has been a psychologist with a special interest in major trauma and disability. She has also been involved in research, most recently focusing on helping people with physical injuries engage in returning to meaningful work. Welcome, Diana.
Thank you, Antonio.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, and thank you for the Spinal Research Institute for inviting me.
No, it's our pleasure. Being Mental Health Awareness Month, I think this would be a great conversation for us to have. I think first and foremost, so being a psychologist, what attracted you to psychology in the first place?
Well, I think there's a couple of reasons, I think, why psychology is probably one of the most popular subjects. Certainly at our university, one of the largest cohorts. As a subject, I think it teaches you a range of skills that employers really like. So it's not just about learning about, human behaviour and communication, but you also learn about sort of human relationships, you learn problem-solving skills, how to see things in a different way. And I think through that, you develop your own self-awareness, your own sort of skills, your own behaviours. And they're the sorts of things that are really transferable. So for me, I actually studied psychology as a subject, as part of my arts degree. And I found I really sort of gelled with a lot of the content. So I continued with postgraduate study and then ultimately a master's degree and became a psychologist, and more recently a PhD, a research degree in psychology.
So psychology is so broad, and I know that doing an undergraduate degree myself. So what was it that drew you to the trauma and rehabilitation side of psychology?
So that actually came through my clinical placements. In my master's degree, I had a placement at a major teaching hospital here, the Royal Adelaide Hospital, and part of that placement involved working alongside the senior psychologist in the spinal injuries unit. And that was with inpatients, but also outpatients. And I just loved the team dynamics, working with a range of disciplines who just bring so much value and expertise to a case, and also learning from the patients themselves, amazing stories of resilience and coping. So the first job I actually applied for was in a hospital setting. It was in brain injury rehabilitation, and I was there for about 10 years. And then an opportunity came up at my old placement in the Royal Adelaide Hospital. So I took that and I was there for about, 10 years.
In your time working there, did you see any significant changes in the way that, I guess, inpatients, specifically spinal patients, and the psychological side of the injury, I guess, was dealt with and treated? Or
yeah, actually, when I started, the position was still fairly new, psychology, and was fairly new to rehabilitation. These days, across spinal units, psychology is quite standard, So a lot of my initial work involved educating not just the patients but staff about what I do, and also helping them realise that it's, me working as part of a team. I think we're all responsible as a team to help patients adjust, cope with their injury the best way they can. And, I actually found that as sort of patients understood that it was just the norm to have the psychologist on the ward, they were quite open to speaking to me about how they were going. They'd see me constantly on the ward, and you'd have fairly informal sessions in the tea room and so on, just to check in and see how they were doing. So it really worked well.
they wouldn't see you and bolt the other way. It's like, oh no, here's the
Never.
psychologist, the shrink.
I
That's the
actually
way I
don't
go.
think I ever had. Yeah, I actually don't think I ever had a patient absolutely not want to see me. Of course, there were times when they were distressed or having a tough day, but I'd be able to come back another time and chat to them. So I think that's a good reflection too of our ability as therapists to be able to develop that rapport and work with people from a range of backgrounds, cultural, socio-economic backgrounds, and work with them. So often the patients that I saw in the inpatient setting, because they then became familiar, with my role and what I could do, or the support I could provide them, they would then see me as outpatients once they left rehabilitation.
I know one of the challenges you said that in our previous conversation that you were one psychologist for 25 inpatient,
Yeah.
and that would have been
Yeah.
a challenge. Have you seen now, I guess, more psychologists getting involved in rehab?
Yeah, and we've certainly seen, I think the staff profile of psychology has improved dramatically over the years. And you see a lot of the guidelines now talk about the need to have that sort of standard screening and support from psychology from very early on at the time of injury, and that routine sort of monitoring throughout the continuum of care. So it doesn't just finish when they leave rehabilitation. You need that continuity. A lot of the work I did actually was work closely with the peer counsellors on the ward. So we had the Paraplegic and Quadriplegic Association of SA, who provides some excellent supports for people in the community once they leave rehabilitation. But even within the ward setting, they provide peer support and counselling. So I would often work closely with the counsellors to talk to staff, educate them about issues, and also educate the patients as well.
Oh, that's something I do a fair bit here in Melbourne in our spinal ward as a peer mentor. Is that something that, and I've seen in some of your studies as well, the importance of that? What do you feel as the benefits are, and is that something that is ongoing and progressing? So when you first started working in rehabilitation centres, was there much of that going on compared to now, and the potential for that in the future?
I think, there's certainly the services provided by Paraquad have really expanded. So they now have programs for rural and remote people as well, with the peer mentors and counsellors, and they do a whole range of social activities with them to keep them connected. But I can't, you can't underestimate really the value of peer support. The research shows that not just for the people receiving the support, but the peer mentors themselves find, value and meaning in it, and being able to share their expertise and knowledge then gives the person with the newly acquired injury a sense of confidence and not feeling alone, and that sense of social connectedness. So a lot of the work I'm doing now is trying to see how we can also train and support peer mentors to look at other avenues of rehabilitation, like return to work, for example, and vocational counselling, because a lot of that peer work has been done abroad, but not so much in Australia. I think we can do more there in terms of addressing that gap.
There could be potential research for that into Australia.
Potential research, Antonio. I reckon that's a perfect subject for your PhD at Adelaide University.
Well, I'm sure I can look into that for sure. On that, you mentioned the importance of connectiveness and community for people going through spinal cord injuries and trauma, I guess. And that's something that I know through my experience that when I isolated myself, that's when I developed a lot of my own problems. And when I created a sense of community, connecting out through different avenues, that that really helped myself.
Definitely.
And some of your research is into, I guess, people getting involved in work, and obviously that ties into something that I'm really big on. In part of the reason why I got into psychology myself is the importance of purpose. I guess, could you elaborate on that, in the importance of work for people post spinal injury?
Yeah, and you know, it's funny. Work is something we all love or love to hate, isn't it? But it brings more than just financial rewards, although saying that, you know, during COVID, economic stability, security has just been critical for people in so many ways, including their mental health. But work does bring psychological benefits. You know, it does help your overall well-being. And there's a lot of research to say that. But one of the concerns, I guess, with people with a disability and chronic illness in general, and certainly with spinal cord injury, is that it takes often time, even up to 5 years after injury, for them to get into the swing of things and find work. And it's not just about finding work for the sake of work, but meaningful work, you know, because that's what helps sustain a person in a job, if the job is meaningful to them. A lot of what we see in spinal cord injury is underemployment. So people are often working in roles that are just not commensurate with their qualifications and their experience. And that, of course, is a source of stress as well and frustration.
Is there any particular reason for that? Or is it just, is it very broad? I know it's probably a very broad question that every person...
It's a broad question. I think, you know, the employment support providers are much more targeted now. You know, one of the projects I'm working on with a Paraplegic and Quadriplegic Association has been to develop and evaluate a vocational counselling service that's just targeted to people with spinal cord injury. So this is a service delivered by people who understand the nature of spinal cord injury and can provide that practical support and connection with employers. And I think that's a step forward from some of the sort of supports we've seen in the community previously, where often the disability provider doesn't understand spinal cord injury specifically, you know, and their job really is to find just a job for the person, as opposed to a job that is meaningful for them. But I think we've made steps towards that. We've got some excellent disability employment providers here within South Australia.
Yeah, but it's also that flow-on effect. I know that not just, as you say, meaningful work, but connective into the community. You're socialising with people. You're, you know, getting out of the house. Those simple things that, I guess, before someone's spinal injury that they take for granted, that post-injury, even just getting in that routine of, oh, I've got to get up, I've got to go to work a few days a week, creates that sense of purpose. And, you know, definitely something that helped me personally.
Yeah, and actually routine, if anything, I mean, we see it in rehab, don't we? Routine is just part and parcel of your day in rehab, but that's actually really critical to your coping as well. You know, routine gives you that sense of control as well about your day-to-day events. So yeah, I think, again, there are a lot of avenues we can do better in terms of providing vocational supports, but we're certainly getting there. I think, though, with COVID, you've seen that, you know, isolation has really been a core issue for many people, and has really triggered a lot of the, you know, the anxiety and the fears that we've seen. As we see the lockdown measures settle down, that anxiety is settling too, which is good to see.
It's something that I know people often ask me post my injury. It's like, well, how did you adapt to your trauma? And I've always said to people that, imagine having things that you enjoy taken away from you, and something that COVID has been able to, I guess, for me, show people that haven't got a spinal injury, okay, well, this is kind of what it is that I've gone through.
Yeah.
As you say, it takes away people's routines, sense of anxiety. I think the biggest thing when I was going through trauma is, I guess, people now that's causing so much angst is a sense of uncertainty, that we're just not sure what the future holds, I guess. And I think that is a really, what a lot of people are feeling with COVID at the moment.
I think too, though, with COVID, there's been some reports released. People with Disability Australia released a good report, as did the Black Dog Institute, about the impact of COVID on mental health and also people with disabilities. And they comment that COVID has brought some positive changes too, because it's changed the way that services are delivered. So for psychology, for example, we've seen much more telehealth, but the government has been great in supporting that too, through Medicare and rebate. So that's an advantage, isn't it? Because people are better able to access those supports that otherwise they might not have been able to. The government's also provided that practical support for job seekers, which is really critical. But yeah, that sense of disconnection has, for many, been quite a struggle, especially for those states, in your state where the lockdown has been prolonged. You get that frustration from people, understandably.
But as you say, moving forward, that development of technology and infrastructure, one of the barriers of, regardless of spinal injury or not, of people, reaching out to get help, I guess, with mental health is the stigma. They might not physically want to go in to see a psychologist, a GP, where they may feel more comfortable doing it, in their own home over their phone. That could be potentially a good starting point. That infrastructure that would develop during COVID.
I think that's a big one, isn't it? The stigma. I don't know about you, Antonio, when you sort of started psychology. I know when we sort of do the open days here, I will often have students ask me, and from high school, ask me about psychology and say, oh, can you read people's minds, or can you analyse my handwriting? I'm like, well, it's not like that.
I tell them yes. I tell them yes.
Do you?
Yep.
Oh,
so can you read my mind? Can you read my mind? And I just give them a glare. So no.
Oh, they're like, and they say, think of this. I say, we don't have three eyes, we're human. But just, often just venting and being able to talk to someone makes just a huge difference. I'll go back to my role, working as a psychologist. I would often reinforce to the patients, it's not just psychology, you've got a whole team here. Often it was the physio or the OT who would see the person every day in therapy that needed to provide that counselling support. So it was a responsibility of the whole team to do that, to support the person. In saying that, when we talk about mental health, mental illness is not inevitable after spinal cord injury either. You've seen a lot of research now, and I certainly saw it in my work within the spinal unit, of people coping amazingly well and showing true resilience, and just getting on with things.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important, because often there's this huge focus on ill health and illness, but for the majority of people, they cope, with the trauma, and they do the best they can. A lot of it has to do with the supports around them.
Definitely. And something people have often asked me, it's like, well, how did you get through what you got through? And I sort of sit there and I have to actively think about it, because the short answer is I don't know. It's like, well, I just got through it, and whether it's internal resilience or, as you say, support networks or what have you, I might have to psychoanalyze myself one day, do my own PhD on my own journey, I guess.
I mean, that's your second PhD idea within 10 minutes. So
no, there's definitely a lot of, as you say, it's not inevitable that everyone with a spinal cord injury ends up with a mental illness. That in itself could be a research project. So with it being Mental Health Awareness month, as a, I guess, psychologist for people out there, I guess, dealing with COVID and listening to this, what sort of, we've spoken about resilience and coping strategies. Is there anything that, you would say people out there potentially, just to be mindful of as we go through this difficult time?
I think one of the key things that we've seen is some of the misinformation. Often people rely on social media, for example, to get information about COVID and so on. And what I'd encourage people to do is, remember that some of those sources just aren't reliable. If you're wanting reliable sources and understanding more better about COVID and how you can actively manage and prevent infection and spread, look at websites like the World Health Organization, the Australian government websites, credible websites. Don't rely on some of the myths that you hear and see in social media. That's really important. So good quality information is critical. And the government's trying to do that too with some of the ads they provide. In saying that, we've seen confusion in the government too. So it's no wonder that people are confused, because states are operating differently, and one day you hear one message and the next day you hear another message. So good quality information is critical. And again, I think recognising too that supports are out there. It's very easy now to simply, go to your GP and get a referral for psychology, and the services are available, by the internet. I have a lot of colleagues who are sort of running sessions by Zoom, for example, or other software, or they use telephone conferencing or so on. If you're not comfortable talking with psychology initially, talking to your GP at least about some of the issues. If you can, access peer support, talking to peers as well. Someone who has been through, not exactly what you've been through, but similar issues can make a huge difference and make you not feel alone and isolated.
And that's the thing. Somebody doesn't have to go through what I've been through or a major traumatic injury to still have that anxiety, uncertainty, as you say, around the misinformation. That in itself creates, a sense of anxiety amongst people. But yeah, definitely reach out. Something I always say to people is speak to anyone that you trust, because whether it's a friend, whatever, because it's better than speaking to nobody.
Because what you find is those feelings, whether it's anxiety, whether it's anger, it builds up. And it does get to a point where it makes it difficult to cope day to day. And when you're finding that, those feelings are affecting your day-to-day relationships, then it's time that you do need to talk to someone about it, and someone who can perhaps be a bit more objective. So not always necessarily sort of friends and family. That extra step, I think, is important.
Well, thank you, Diana, for a great conversation. I will follow up on those PhDs at some stage.
I will be calling you, Antonio, okay?
I look forward to it. Thank you so much. And to everyone out there watching, please remember to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.